Okay, so like when you think about the pyramids, right? Those big, huge things in Egypt.
Yeah.
What's the first thing that comes to mind? Like, how are those things even built?
Yeah.
And like beyond them just being tombs, like
Yeah.
what do you actually think their purpose was?
Well, it's one of those questions that I think kind of gets a pretty simple answer a lot of the time.
Right.
It's pharaohs and like big, huge, elaborate burial rituals.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just this idea of like the immense power of human labor.
Yeah, the standard story.
Yeah.
But there are some pretty wild ideas floating around that kind of go against that, right?
Oh, yeah.
So today we're going to dive deep into two pieces of source material
Okay.
that offer some alternative perspectives.
Awesome.
First,
That's
we're
what
going
I
to
thought.
look at what these sources are saying, how experts are reacting,
Mm.
and, we're going to do it all with like an open mind. We're
Yeah.
not here to push any agenda,
Yeah.
just trying to understand what people are saying.
Right. I think that's the best way to do it.
Exactly, just lay it all out there.
Yeah, just put it all on the table.
So let's jump into this no humans built the pyramids thing from the Rogan clip.
Okay.
Like the main point they're making is that the size of these things and how insanely precise they are.
Right.
It just points to some level of technology that's way beyond what we think ancient Egypt had, right?
Yeah.
They even use the term like advanced machinery.
Okay, that's interesting.
What was your first thought when you heard that part?
Well, I think what's interesting right off the bat is that they acknowledge that the idea of just slaves building the pyramids
Right.
is probably not accurate.
Yeah.
There's evidence of good quality food at the worker camps,
So.
which means that these were skilled workers and
Yep.
maybe even respected workers.
Yeah.
But then they make this big jump saying even if they were skilled,
Right.
human labor just couldn't have done this.
Yeah, they couldn't have been the original builders.
Right.
They make this comparison to like renovating the White House.
Okay.
Tons of people have worked on it over the years.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they built the thing from scratch.
Right.
It's such a good way to explain this idea
Yeah, I like that analogy.
of like different phases of construction,
Yeah.
different groups involved.
Yeah. It really makes you think about the history of that place.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's a lot longer or more complex than we think. And that kind of leads them to this idea that the pyramids weren't tombs in the traditional sense.
Oh, wow.
Maybe they were like a power plant,
Oh,
drawing energy from underground hot springs.
that's where it gets really wild.
Right.
It's not just a monument sitting there.
Right.
It's like this functional energy-producing machine.
Yeah.
They don't really explain how that would work,
Right.
but the idea of geothermal energy in a pyramid, that's pretty out there.
That is interesting.
So what kind of science, like even theoretically,
Yeah.
could support that idea?
Well, I mean, we know how modern geothermal power plants work.
Yeah.
They use the Earth's heat,
Right.
but it's in specific places where there's a lot of heat,
Okay.
geothermal activity.
Yeah.
But the idea of a pyramid just with its shape,
Yeah.
somehow harnessing that energy
Right.
in a controlled way,
Yeah.
it's just highly speculative. We
Right.
don't really understand the physics of it,
Yeah.
and there's no evidence from ancient Egypt that they had that kind of technology.
No wires or turbines or anything like that.
No, nothing like that.
Yeah. It's more of a what if
Yeah, an interesting possibility.
than like a proven fact.
Exactly.
And then this is where they bring up the Emerald Tablets of Thoth.
Okay.
And they're presented as like this ancient source of knowledge
Yeah.
about the pyramid's real purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about advanced technology,
Right.
and they say the text is like too accurate for now.
Too accurate for now. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So let's talk about these tablets. They're also called the Smaragdine tablet or
Yeah.
Tabula Smaragdina.
Okay.
And they're like a foundational text in alchemy
Okay.
and Hermeticism, which is this like philosophical, esoteric tradition.
Okay.
They're attributed to Hermes Trismegistus,
Right.
who's this mythical figure. He's like a blend of the Greek god Hermes
Right.
and the Egyptian god Thoth.
Okay.
So who was he and when did these tablets show up?
Yeah, exactly.
So Hermes Trismegistus,
Right.
he's a legendary figure
Yeah.
associated with wisdom, magic, alchemy
Okay.
in Hellenistic Egypt.
Mhm.
The actual Emerald Tablet, like the physical text,
Yeah.
it first shows up in Arabic sources in the 8th and 9th centuries AD,
Okay.
which is way after the pyramids were built.
Right. Thousands of years later.
Thousands of years.
Yeah.
Then it was translated into Latin in the 12th century,
Okay.
and it became really important in European alchemy.
Gotcha.
Now, these Hermetic texts,
Mm-hmm.
They emerged in Greco-Roman Egypt around the 2nd century BC.
Okay.
And they talked about all sorts of stuff.
Right.
Astrology, medicine, philosophy, magic.
Yeah, the whole shebang.
They drew on Egyptian, Greek, and Near Eastern traditions.
Wow, so they're drawing from all over the place.
Yeah.
But the tablet itself is a much later thing.
Right.
But the videos trying to link Hermes Trismegistus back to Thoth, and then it goes even further.
Oh, boy.
They suggest that Thoth might have been an alien.
Oh.
And they even mention a spaceship on Earth in the Emerald Tablets.
Okay, we're getting into some interesting territory here.
We're going down the rabbit hole.
That's quite a leap
Right.
from how Thoth is usually seen in Egyptian mythology.
Right, he's the god of wisdom, writing, magic,
Right.
not spaceships.
Yeah.
They also talk about how a lot of ancient civilizations seem to have this similar understanding of advanced knowledge.
Okay.
So they're suggesting a shared origin,
Yeah.
maybe a non-human one.
It's true that there are some interesting similarities in their mythology, symbolism, even their architecture
Yeah.
across different cultures.
Right.
And that has led some people to think about ancient global contact or like a really old civilization that we don't know about.
Right, that everyone came from.
Yeah.
But most archaeologists and anthropologists, they think those similarities are just because of shared human experiences.
Okay. Like people coming up with the same ideas independently or spreading their culture over time.
Right.
Not because of aliens or anything like that.
Okay.
And then there's the whole issue of how they actually built the pyramids.
Yeah, with just the tools they had.
Yeah.
Like, how did they move those huge stones hundreds of miles?
Yeah.
And how do they build on sand?
Right.
It's tough to explain.
And the video even jokes about them having electric and Wi-Fi.
Right.
Which is obviously like way beyond what we think they had.
Yeah, that's definitely pushing it.
So what do we actually know about how they moved those stones?
Well, the logistics are definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
And researchers are still studying it.
Okay.
We know the ancient Egyptians were amazing engineers.
Right.
They were super organized, and they used ramps and levers and stuff.
Right.
But how they lifted those giant stones, that's still a mystery.
Yeah.
And about the Giza Plateau,
Yeah.
geologists say the landscape has changed over time.
Right. So maybe it wasn't all sand back then. But it's not like it was a completely different environment.
Okay.
The challenges were still there.
Yeah, building on sand is never easy.
No, it's not.
So that's the no humans theory.
Yeah. Pretty wild.
Now let's switch gears to the Jerusalem Post article.
Okay.
This vast city under the pyramids.
Yeah.
They're saying they found it using some fancy radar tech, right?
Right. It's called synthetic aperture radar, or SAR.
SAR, okay.
It basically combines radar data from satellites with information about ground movements.
Like vibrations and stuff?
Yeah, like tiny seismic vibrations.
Okay.
And by processing all that data, they can create 3D images of what's underground.
So they don't even have to dig.
Nope, it's non-invasive.
That's cool.
But it's important to remember these findings haven't been peer-reviewed yet.
Peer-reviewed, meaning?
It means other experts haven't checked their work to make sure it's good.
Gotcha. So what exactly are they saying they found down there?
Well, they're describing this huge underground complex. Okay.
Stretching over 6,500 feet.
Wow.
Beneath the pyramids.
That's massive.
And they say it's about 10 times bigger than the pyramids themselves.
Whoa.
And they're describing specific things they found.
Okay.
Like 8 vertical shafts shaped like cylinders.
Okay.
Going down about 2,100 feet.
Gype.
Each shaft has these spiral pathways that connect to 2 giant cube-shaped structures.
Cube-shaped.
Yeah. Each one is about 80 meters on each side.
80 meters? That's almost as big as the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, it's huge.
And they're connecting this to the halls of Amenti.
Right.
Which sounds like something straight out of mythology.
It does, right?
So what are the halls of Amenti?
In Egyptian mythology, it's often seen as the underworld, the realm of the dead, or a place that's really spiritually important.
Okay. But of course, there are experts who are skeptical.
Yeah, not everyone believes it.
The article mentions some pretty strong counter-arguments, like from Professor Lawrence Conyers.
He's a geophysicist who's done a lot of work in archaeology.
Yeah, he knows his stuff.
And he calls this whole vast city idea a huge exaggeration.
He doesn't buy it.
He says SAR technology might not be accurate at those depths.
Right.
Especially with the kind of rock that's there.
It's not the best tool for seeing that deep underground.
And he thinks it's more likely that there are smaller things down there.
Yeah, like shafts or chambers.
Okay.
Maybe even older than the pyramids.
Right, because that site has a long history.
Exactly. It's been a sacred place for a long time.
Yeah.
But a whole city, he doesn't think so.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's more plausible that there are some smaller, older structures than this giant, sprawling city.
And the article does say that SAR
Yeah.
works best for things near the surface.
Right.
And it's not so good at seeing through solid rock.
Especially at great depths.
So that doesn't sound great for trying to see thousands of feet down.
Yeah, not ideal.
And then there's Dr. Zahi Hawass.
Oh, yeah, the big name in Egyptology.
He's totally denying these claims.
Yeah, he's not having it.
He says there are no columns under King Khafre's pyramid
Mm-hmm.
and that no one's used radar there recently.
Right.
He calls the claims baseless.
Strong words.
Yeah, he even thinks it's an attempt to undermine Egyptian civilization.
Wow.
And Dr. Hussein Abdel-Basir agrees.
Yeah.
He calls it exaggeration and deception.
Hmm.
And he's really emphasizing peer-reviewed publications.
Right. That's how science works.
Yeah, you got to have the evidence.
Yeah, you got to show your work.
And they're both saying that current tech
just
can't penetrate that deep.
Right. The tools we have now have limits.
It's interesting how this kind of story blows up online.
Oh, yeah.
The article talks about all the buzz on X.
Mm-hmm.
People are connecting these underground structures
Right.
to those alternative theories about the pyramids being energy devices.
Yeah, it all ties together.
And they're mentioning Tesla and Christopher Dunn.
Those names always come up in these conversations.
It shows how quickly new information, even if it's not proven, gets woven into these existing narratives.
It's like people are looking for evidence to support what they already believe.
Right. And the idea of hidden chambers and lost knowledge, that's really appealing to people who think the pyramids are more than just tombs.
Absolutely.
But in the end, we need proof.
Yeah. We can't just go on speculation.
The researchers themselves say they need to excavate.
Right, they gotta dig.
To really confirm their findings.
To see what's really down there.
But getting permission for that?
Yeah, that's the hard part.
It's not easy.
Not at all.
And Professor Conyers says targeted excavations based on solid evidence would be the next step.
That's how you do it properly.
So radar data is interesting.
Yeah.
But it's not enough to convince the scientific community.
It's a starting point, but you need more.
And the Egyptian government hasn't said anything about these claims.
That's interesting.
They're usually pretty careful about messing with the official story of their history.
They want to protect their heritage.
Right.
And make sure any interpretations are based on good science.
Yeah, they're not going to jump on every wild theory.
No, they need to be sure.
So here we are at the end of our deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
And we've got these two very different, but equally intriguing challenges to the traditional view of the pyramids.
It really makes you think.
On one hand, we've got the idea of alien builders with super advanced tech.
Right.
Hinted at in the Emerald Tablets.
An ancient mystery.
And on the other hand, we've got these scientific claims of this giant underground city.
Found with radar.
But that's facing a lot of skepticism from experts.
Rightfully so.
And both of these ideas are forcing us to rethink who built the pyramids and why.
It's not as simple as we thought.
Yeah, we're going beyond the idea of just tombs.
Right. There could be so much more to it.
And that brings us to our final thought for you.
Okay, I'm listening.
Given everything we've talked about, how hard it is to really know what's under the pyramids and how much weight the official story has.
Right. It's been the accepted narrative for so long.
What kind of evidence would actually convince you about the origins of the pyramids?
It's a tough question.
And the reality of any hidden structures.
Yeah, what would it take?
Think about what it would mean.
Okay.
If either of these scenarios turned out to be true, it would change how we see history.
Absolutely.
And what we think ancient civilizations were capable of.
It would be huge.
It's definitely something to ponder.
Yeah, something to think about long after this deep dive.
Exactly. Keep those brain gears turning.
I know mine will be.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
Until then,
keep exploring.
Stay curious.